to first of all say thank you for serving on the commission. This is our first meeting in what is an historic year after passage of historic legislation. And I just wanted to get a little bit nostalgic for a minute. When I first had the opportunity to serve as the chair of the commission back in 2015, the commission looked so differently than it looks now. And we had bold ideas and missions ahead of us, but we had no idea how we were going to get there. And we still have a really long ways to go, but I just want to say how impressive your work, the volunteers, the state agency staff, the sector, the legislative branch, how much progress we have made and continue to make, and really have a profound impact and set a shining example. I know Mark Stewart, who's now very engaged with the U.S. Climate Alliance, the 25 governor-led organizations, Maryland, not just our greenhouse gas reduction plan at the in the executive branch, but also the work of the commission and the legislation that was just enacted are truly historic and set a really strong and positive example. And so I want to say thanks to everyone, particular recognize the Delegate Stein, Senator Pinsky, your staffs for your tenacity and endurance. You know, it took a couple of years, 2 legislative sessions, an amazing amount of time and effort and listening and modifying and adjusting. And now we have enormously important path forward, not just through the greenhouse gas reduction plan, but the legislation that was just enacted. And I would also just say that back in 2015, I was getting a lot of insights from Maryland Department of the Environment, the Director of Air and Radiation, Tad Abram. And I want to take the opportunity to make an announcement in terms of a staff announcement, a really important one, and that is after decades of leading the Air and Radiation Administration for MDE, Tad Abram will be taking on a new role as an advisor over the next several months, but will be stepping down from that role on May 4th as the head of Air and Radiation. Chris Hoagland, who so many of you know, we lost Chris over a year ago because EPA headquarters stole him to work on important climate legislation, regulation, and analysis. And now we're delighted to be welcoming him back. And on May 4th, Chris Hoagland will become the Director of Air and Radiation, working extremely closely with Mark Stewart and Chris Beck, the whole climate change team at MDE. And I can tell you that while I'm biased, I would say that MDE has assembled the strongest climate program of any state environmental agency. We really have talent, and they will learn and benefit from the Climate Change Commission and everyone else involved and the other state agencies that are stepping up to advance climate and environmental justice. And Tad will stay on as an advisor, but we're going to have just a lot of, I'm just really proud of that component. Like I'm proud of the work of the state of Maryland on moving forward, not just with the Climate Solutions Now Act, but also with the work at the local level and with the counties and with the university systems and the NGOs and the private sector. We've got to all be working together to achieve the climate ambition that we now have squarely and legislatively in front of us. So thanks to everyone. As you're going to hear, and as you've been hearing through your work group participation, the look and feel of the Climate Change Commission is also going to be changing and coordinating increasingly with the Environmental Justice Sustainable Communities Commission. There's just a lot of really important things happening and a lot of necessary and important work moving forward. Thanks to everyone for their engagement. And Mark, I'm gonna turn it back to you, but consider that a longer than usual opening statement, but one where we should all be proud and more focused than ever on delivering on the results that Marylanders want and expect, not just reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but as Jeannie Riccio knows, strengthening our resiliency and adaptation strategies and meeting goals that are set for us and continuing to improve upon our report card ratings for greenhouse gas reduction as well as resiliency. So thank you very much. Mark, let me turn it back to you.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. Reflecting on the change in the air director leadership makes me think that some of you on the call probably have had the same experience that I've had, studying under brilliant professors who won, received Nobel Prizes and this and that. That's how I felt over the last 9 months working for Tad Aburn, a real leader in this field, and certainly how I will feel with the direction from Chris Hoagland, another brilliant mind in this field. So I just want to echo the Secretary's comments that exciting leadership change from one exceptional leader to another at MDE. The climate team is very excited about it. Would any of the commission co-chairs or other commissioners like to offer any comments at the top of the meeting before we get into today's agenda? Well, I'm sure that you all will have the opportunity and take the opportunity. Oh, thank you, Delegate Stein, breaking the ice here. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Secretary Grumbles, for your comments and leadership of this commission, especially over the past few years. And I want to congratulate Senator Pinsky for his incredible leadership in shepherding climate solutions now across the finish line. And I want to thank the commission and especially the building work group for all the work that was done in the past year. The building work group recommendations really served as the blueprint for much of the building section of the legislation. So I want to thank everyone who was involved with that. It really made a big difference.
Thank you, Delegate. Appreciate that very much.
Any other comments at the top before we dive into the agenda today? Yes, Dr. Dickerson.
Oh, I just want to make the comment to congratulate Tad on his impending retirement and point out that he has always been eager to let the science guide the policy. So this is a good way to look at the world.
And I'll just remind everybody that he's not retiring till towards the end of the year. He'll be around providing advice and leadership on some very important areas of air and climate and environmental justice. But thanks, Russ, for that. And everybody, I'm so impressed by the amount of time and effort you put into the climate challenge. And I know that the commission, which gained tremendous attention and respect throughout the legislative process, will need to continue to step up its game and outreach to communities and to businesses and counties and municipalities over the coming months and years, because we have a lot of important work to do. So thank you.
Well, speaking of the important work ahead, we will spend most of today's meeting discussing climate-focused legislation that passed during the 2022 Maryland General Assembly session and hearing updates from the Commission's working groups and climate justice team. Let's go ahead and dive into the legislative summary. Kim Drake, if you would please go ahead and share our slides for today and advance to slide 2. Thank you. As the Secretary indicated, this was probably the most consequential year for climate policy in Maryland since the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reduction Act became law 13 years ago. Much of the media coverage went to the Climate Solutions Now Act, which gives Maryland the most ambitious GHG reduction goal of any state in the nation, requires large buildings to achieve net zero emissions by 2040, sets the state on a path to electrifying its transportation and building sectors, and much, much more. There were, in fact, several other climate bills that passed this year that significantly enhanced the state's climate policy and programs. Just to name a few, the Conservation Finance Act gives the state new tools for creating carbon markets. The Clean Cars Act gives you $3,000 toward the purchase of your next electric vehicle. And we really need you to purchase an electric vehicle as your next car if you're going to buy a car. The energy, next slide, please. The Energy Storage Tax Credit gives you $5,000 toward the installation of battery backup power at home. Energy performance targets and low-income housing will ensure that energy efficiency programs reach the households that live with the greatest energy burden. Next slide. Energy and water efficiency standards will improve the efficiency of everyday appliances we use in our buildings, and much, much more. So yes, we will certainly discuss the Climate Solutions Now Act and its implications for the work of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. But first, Chris Beck, Deputy Program Manager for the Climate Change Program, and Dr. Rachel Lamb, Natural Carbon Sequestration Lead at MDE, will give you a quick overview of several of the other bills on our list. Commission members, feel free to raise your hand and ask questions or offer comments during the presentation. Many of you have deep knowledge of some of the legislation we will discuss, and we invite you to contribute to the discussion. So Rachel, would you please provide an overview of the Conservation Finance Act and what it can mean for carbon markets?
Sure. Well, I know we're all really excited about the passage of the Conservation Finance Act, and there's a lot of great components to it. I want to flag for this group 3 categories of changes. So first, one of the opportunities that it provides is expanded financing options for nature or natural carbon sequestration. So first, it positions Maryland as the first state in the nation to define blue infrastructure. And in its definitions of both blue and green infrastructure, it includes not only water quality improvements, but also carbon sequestration, among other benefits. This also places financing opportunities for blue and green infrastructure on par with existing financing options for gray and built infrastructure. And this is particularly relevant to some of our amazing financing opportunities through our state revolving loan funds. It also expands a new contracting option for pay-for-success contracts. So this kind of change to state procurement law means that we can now purchase quantified and verified environmental outcomes, including carbon, and actually places a prioritization on projects which can not only maximize water quality improvements, but also co-benefits, including explicitly carbon sequestration. The second thing it does is actually facilitates expanded access to voluntary carbon markets. It does this in at least 2 ways. First, it actually positions DNR and MDA to negotiate partnerships with experienced external organizations to help private landowners, like our forest owners and our farmers, to engage in voluntary participation with the carbon offset market. It also actually asks DNR to explore and develop at least 1 offset project on state land and a second project in a marine or estuarine environment. The third thing it does is establishes new advisory bodies, which MDE is asked to chair. So one is a 3-year termed new commission on blue and green infrastructure, which is being asked to offer recommendations on how to promote ecological restoration across the state, with a focus on a potential overlapping areas of requirements from local, state, and federal governments. The second body that it creates is a temporary task force that will help identify best practices for natural capital accounting and make sure that these practices really align with governmental accounting standards. So there's a lot of other important implications of this bill, but again, the law now, but the three I just wanted to highlight were expanded financing opportunities for blue and green infrastructure, facilitated access to voluntary carbon markets, and 2 new established advisory bodies to help with implementation.
Thank you, Rachel. Chris, would you walk us through several of the other bills on our list?
Sure, thanks, Mark. I'm going to cover roughly 10 bills, and like Mark mentioned, if I'm interpreting the legislation incorrectly, please chime in. I'm going to move through these bills rather quickly. The first bill is in the transportation sector. This is the Clean Cars Act of 2022. It reestablishes the tax credit from the previous iteration of the bill, which is the 2021 Clean Cars Act. In order to be eligible for the $3,000 credit to purchase an EV, the car must be new. It has to cost less than $50,000, and it needs to be a plug-in or fuel cell. The 2022 bill decreases the maximum price of an eligible vehicle down from $63,000 to $50,000. The bill also includes some other incentives for heavy equipment. That's a $5,000 credit. $2,000 for an auto cycle, which apparently is a 3-wheeled vehicle that you can buy electric, and $1,000 for a motorcycle. Important to note that there's no tax incentive or credit for hybrids. Also, the bill establishes a grant program for heavy-duty ZEVs, subject to available funds. The applicants apply for a grant from MEA up to 20% of the cost of a qualified medium or heavy-duty ZEV. Important to note that the funding is through 2027, which gives buyers more confidence as they begin to shop for their next car. The funding it amounts to a total of $20 million in fiscal year 24, 25, 26, and 27. So sustainable grant, sustainable fund. It gives the consumer confidence, which is I think is important. Next slide, please. More transportation legislation, mainly to support the electrification of the sector. House Bill 157, Senate Bill 146, they enable a legislation to ensure that EV charging infrastructure is available to people that drive EVs. It requires certain signage for parking spots and as well as the infrastructure itself. It also allows for civil penalties if you were to park a non-EV in an EV parking spot. The second bill here is Senate Bill 61, House Bill 10. Is legislation to support the electrification of public transit. It requires very important workforce training at MTA for the ZEV transit buses and the folks that will be charging and maintaining the upgraded fleet. So this helps ensure that the workforce is trained on the new technology. Next slide, please. So these we're moving on to the energy sector. These are some tax credits. House Bill 215 is a tax credit. It actually just extends the energy storage income credit for an additional 2 years through 2024 for any Marylander who installs residential energy storage. It also establishes a non-lapsing energy storage grant fund. Important to note that in the last 4 years, MEA distributed over 500 awards for residential storage to the amount of $2.25 million. Important enabling legislation there. Moving on to Senate Bill 860, House Bill 1039. This encourages community solar on schools, rooftops, brownfields, landfills, and on ag land. Specifically, ag land co-located with solar. So in other words, productive ag land that we share with PV. It also requires that all new schools consider the feasibility through analysis of rooftop solar. And it also requires MEA to report on the effectiveness of these incentives to the General Assembly by December 31, 2024. Next slide, please, Kim. Thanks. This bill increases. It's an effort to increase renewable energy through the RPS. It modifies the offshore wind renewable energy credit, or OREC, mechanism to make it allows each electric company, instead of just the electricity supplier, to purchase ORECs, or offshore wind RECs, just to meet the RPS requirements. It also allows the electric companies to recover the cost of those RECs through a non-bypassable surcharge to the customers. It basically just makes it easier for electric companies to purchase the RECs to comply with the RPS in the same manner that the electricity suppliers have been able to under the current law. Next slide, please. Moving on to some DHCD-focused legislation, particularly on buildings. Senate Bill 524, House Bill 108 extend the requirement that DHCD offer energy efficiency programs to ratepayers beyond the current Empower cycle through 2026. It establishes an efficiency goal of at least 0.4% per year improvement compared to the 2016 baseline starting next year. The bill also establishes the Green and Healthy Task Force staffed by DHCD and requires several reporting and planning requirements of DHCD and the Public Service Commission. Lastly, it requires that DHCD develop a plan to provide energy efficiency retrofits to low-income households by 2030. Next slide, please. The next bills I'll discuss are MEA focused. This House Bill 31, Senate Bill 256 establish a resiliency hub grant program to provide free electricity to low and moderate income households during outages. A resiliency hub, it just means it's a location where solar or battery storage are in place and designed to provide electricity to meet community needs during extended grid outages. So businesses, nonprofits, even state government, local governments are eligible for these grants. A project is eligible for the grant if it simply just develops a resiliency hub that will operate for at least 5 years and serve a community of majority low or moderate income households. Next slide, please. House Bill 772, Senate Bill 494. This bill just replaces existing energy efficiency standards for various products with better, more stringent, more energy efficient standards. It also requires that MEA adopt new standards by regulation by next year. Next slide. This tax credit is aimed to decrease VMT through other modes of transportation. It's a DGS departmental bill and expands the existing commuter benefit tax credit. It's aimed at employer-funded programs for carpooling, walking and biking, more telework, and other multimodal commuting opportunities. MDOT must administer the credit and may award a maximum of $1 million per year. MDOT is awarding the credits to a first-come, first-served basis. And they also have to adopt regulations establishing the tax credit application process. Next slide. This bill is aimed at state retirement and pension system investments. It requires asset managers for the state retirement and pension system to consider climate risk and the impact of climate in investment. So including the monitoring of net zero aligned investments and just general climate solutions to ensure that we can meet our long-term net zero goals. A climate risk assessment, as required by the bill, must include a review of the total investment portfolio to determine the level of climate risk, and also prioritize high-impact sectors that are responsible for greenhouse gas emissions. It should increase investments in emerging technology, renewable energy, even carbon capture and storage. So it establishes a process for regular reassessment of the potential systematic risks of climate change based on the system's assets. And it requires utilization of the best available science, strategies, and climate risk analysis in making fiduciary decisions. So yeah, that seems could be significantly impactful.
Chris, I just want to interject here, particularly with the treasurer. Treasurer Derek Davis, who's a commission member and has joined us. This legislation and other components of the legislation you've been reviewing just underscore that fiscal health is closely connected to environmental health and sustainability. And so it's just really important to have a commission where all the different public and private sector entities can come together from time to time, which is what this Climate Change Commission is all about. And particularly on tracking how this new legislation will be implemented will be helpful. So thank you, Treasurer, for joining us in this meeting.
Indeed.
Go ahead, Chris.
Thanks, Ben. Last slide, Kim. And then we can move to climate solutions, or Mark will cover. So the last bill that I'll summarize here is a bill that establishes the Office of Resilience in the Maryland Department of Energy Management, now known as MDEM. The newly appointed Chief Resiliency Officer will coordinate all state and local efforts to build resilience to risks that were previously identified in the Maryland Hazard Mitigation Plan and develop a state resiliency strategy. The bill establishes that is the intent of the General Assembly that all state agencies, as well as UMCs, coordinate with the new office to increase state climate resilience. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Mark, who can go into detail about climate solutions.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I will touch on provide an overview of some of the main provisions in this sprawling legislation, and I do so humbly because some of the authors of the legislation are here with us today. So, Senator Pinsky, Delegate Stein, feel free to tell me when I get something wrong in this.
The first is to edit the use of the word sprawling. Probably you might want to think about that adjective.
Noted.
Just saying.
So first and foremost, importantly, this sets new legal targets for Maryland's economy-wide emissions reductions, including the target of a 60% reduction from 2006 levels by 2031, which is the most ambitious near-term target of any U.S. state. It requires a doubling of Maryland's historic emission reduction rate from now through 2031. It also sets a target of net zero emissions by 2045, which is a target that was recommended by the Climate Commission. It matches the long-term targets set by California and Virginia. Next slide, please. MDE is required over the next 14 months to develop the plan to achieve the 60% by 2031 target. A draft plan is due next June, with the final plan being due at the end of 2023. There's some specific provisions within that plan. We may not include highway widening or additional road construction as a GHG reduction measure. We must use the 20-year global warming potential for methane. include policy recommendations for the continued operations of Maryland's existing zero carbon electric generators, and of course, continued provisions to require that the measures within the plan themselves create net economic and job benefits for Maryland. Next slide. There was a heavy focus on buildings in the bill. It is the intent of the General Assembly that the state move toward broader electrification of both existing and new buildings. The Maryland Building Code Administration in 2023 shall develop recommendations for adopting an all-electric building code to identify the fastest and most cost-efficient methods of decarbonizing buildings, study the availability of equipment needed for all-electric buildings, and evaluate projected annual peak summer and winter gas electric load impacts of electrification, among other requirements of the study. Next slide. For new and existing large buildings, MDE is required to develop and adopt Building Energy Performance Standards, or BEPS regulations. Buildings larger than 35,000 square feet would be covered. Those buildings that are covered, with a few exemptions provided by the legislation, would report energy use annually beginning in 2025. Those buildings would need to achieve a 20% reduction in net direct emissions by 2030 compared with average buildings of similar construction. I want to expand on this a little because there was a lot of discussion around this one point throughout the last few months. The important piece there is compared with average buildings of similar construction. If you, for instance, owned Class A office space in Maryland and it is already more energy efficient than the average of all Class A office space in Maryland, it's possible that you would already be meeting the 20% reduction from the average baseline by 2030. So there's modeling that will need to be done in the development of the regulations to identify the averages per building type. So it's not necessarily a 20% reduction for each and every individual building, regardless of how efficient they are currently. However, all large buildings would have the same long-term target, achieve net zero direct emissions by 2040. Important to note, we have many all-electric large buildings already in the state. Those buildings already have net zero direct emissions. So they may already be in compliance with the long-term target. There are exemptions for agricultural, historic, and manufacturing buildings along with schools, and the energy and emissions associated with commercial kitchens within covered buildings is also exempt. Next slide. MDE shall create a Building Energy Transition Implementation Task Force that will, by December 23, recommend programs, policies, and incentives aimed at helping owners of large buildings meet the building energy performance standards and support the broader electrification of the building sector. The recommendations may include tax credits or direct subsidy payments for projects, holistic retrofit targets for low-income households, on-bill low-interest financing, and other financial mechanisms. Next slide. MEA shall create a climate transition and clean energy hub to provide technical assistance and information to public and private entities to achieve GHG reductions from the building sector. Empower Maryland, beginning in 2025, would change so that the core objective shall be based on a portfolio of mutually reinforcing goals, including greenhouse gas emission reductions, energy savings, net customer benefits, and reaching underserved customers. Next slide. Looking a little more narrowly at procurement done by the state, by 2030, at least 75% of the electricity purchased for use in state facilities must be derived from no or low carbon energy sources. It's the intent of the General Assembly that 100% of the passenger cars in the state fleet be zero emission vehicles by 2031 and all other light duty vehicles be ZEVs by 2036. And the state shall also identify options for preferencing low carbon concrete in state funded construction projects. Important to note that cement manufacturing is a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions in Maryland's industrial sector. Next slide. The Chesapeake Conservation Corps will receive $1.5 million annually in the state budget to employ youth and young adults to deploy clean energy technology and mitigate and prevent the impacts of climate change in communities that are disproportionately affected by climate impacts. There will be $5 million in the state budget for FY 24 through 26 to create a climate catalytic capital fund in MCEC. MCEC shall use this money to leverage funding from a variety of sources to provide financing for GHG reduction projects, and at least 40% of the funding shall be used for projects in communities with low to moderate income households. Next slide. There's an electric school bus pilot program that the electric utilities may now implement to help local school systems purchase electric school buses that would serve as grid scale battery storage via vehicle-to-grid technology. So in other words, in addition to having electric school buses on the road, it also provides the opportunity to have more battery storage on the grid to help stabilize a more resilient electric grid. There's also $500,000 in the budget for FY 24 through 28 for the Healthy Soils program to increase biological activity and carbon sequestration in agricultural soils. Next slide. A tax exemption for community solar projects, an exemption from paying county and municipal property tax for new community solar projects that provide at least 50% of a project's electrical output to low to moderate income customers at rates that are at least 20% lower than the rates charged by local electric companies. And those projects must be located on a rooftop, parking facility canopy, or on a brownfield. Next slide. The PSC shall report annually beginning in 2024 on the state of electric distribution system planning to reduce greenhouse gases, improve energy efficiency, incorporate energy storage, increase use of distributed energy resources, including electric vehicles, etc. And each state agency shall, when conducting long-term planning, developing policy, and drafting regulations, take into consideration the likely impact of the agency's decisions relative to Maryland's GHG reduction goals and the likely impact on disproportionately affected communities. Next slide. The Commission on Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities must adopt a methodology to identify communities that are disproportionately affected by climate impacts, develop strategies to address geographic impact concerns and reducing GHG emissions and co-pollutants, build climate equity and resilience within disproportionately affected communities, and establish goals for the percentage of state funding for GHG reduction measures that should be used for the benefit of disproportionately affected communities. Slide. And I think that this might be where we end in terms of touching some of the high points of the Climate Solutions Now Act, and importantly, wanted to end on this note for the Climate Commission. The legislation requires that a couple things specific to the Climate Commission. One, that MDE shall include in the Climate Commission's annual report an accounting of state money spent on measures to reduce greenhouse gases and co-pollutants and the percentage of funding that benefited disproportionately affected communities. That reporting requirement begins with the 2023 Commission annual report. The Climate Solutions Now Act also creates 4 new working groups of the Climate Commission. The Commission currently has 4 working groups. We're going to hear reports from those working groups later in today's meeting. This adds 4 additional ones. So we'll go from 4 to 8 working groups for the Climate Commission. They include the Just Transition Employment and Retraining Working Group, the Energy Industry and Revitalization Working Group, Energy Resilience and Efficiency Working Group, and Solar Photovoltaic Systems Recovery, Reuse, and Recycling Working Group. I want to provide a little bit more detail because this is so significant for the Commission about what each of these working groups would do. A Just Transition Employment and Retraining Working Group will, by December 23, conduct a study and produce a report on workforce development and retraining related to the transition to a clean energy economy. The working group must conduct a study to identify the number of jobs that will be created to counter climate impacts, examine potential workforce disruptions, and develop an inventory of skills needed for a clean energy transition, among other requirements. An energy industry revitalization working group will, also by December of 23, conduct a study and produce a report on the effect on small businesses from the transition to a clean energy economy. The working group must conduct a study to identify the number of small businesses impacted by the transition, estimate the potential costs and benefits of transitioning small businesses to renewable energy, and conduct an inventory of the energy generating facilities that could close as a result of the transition to a clean energy economy, among other requirements. An energy resilience and efficiency working group shall, by December of 23, conduct a study and produce a report on issues and opportunities related to energy infrastructure improvements, transmission and efficiency improvements, and battery backup viability. The working group must conduct a study to identify methods to encourage energy storage research, improve grid reliability, and examine the life cycle and viability of energy facilities, among other requirements. A solar photovoltaic systems recovery, reuse, and recycling working group will, again by December of 23, conduct a study and produce a report on managing end-of-life solar photovoltaic systems and their components. The working group must conduct a study to perform an economic analysis of the impact of end-of-life management of PV systems on ratepayers, conduct an environmental assessment of end-of-life scenarios for PV systems, and recommend financial mechanisms that best support a circular economy, among other requirements. Note also, finally, MDE must also staff a building energy transition implementation task force that also by December of 23 shall produce the state's funding and financing plan for reducing GHG emissions from the building sector. The task force is not under the umbrella of the Climate Commission, but some Climate Commission members might be interested in serving on that task force. Please reach out to me if you're interested in seeking an appointment to the task force and you represent one of the organizations listed in the membership section of the task force provisions in the Climate Solutions Now Act. All right, thanks, Kim, for sharing those slides today. You can end slide share. One more note of significance related to everything I just covered. The Climate Solutions Now Act requires MDE to publish a draft 2031 plan in approximately 14 months from now. That means we'll have to have a draft plan ready to circulate with state agencies in the governor's office next spring, soon after the new administration is in place. Now through the fall is our period for identifying measures that could achieve a 60% reduction in emissions by 2031. The 2030 GGRA plan is our starting point. The measures in that plan, if fully implemented, are projected to reduce emissions around 45 to 50% by 2030. Our challenge is to close the gap between the GGRA plan measures and the 60% by 2031 target. Finding and implementing additional measures will be challenging. We know that the largest sources of emissions in Maryland are transportation, electricity generation, and fuel use in buildings, in that order. The GGRA plan already calls for around 60% of cars sold in 2030 to be zero emissions vehicles. For Maryland's electricity supply to be 50% renewable and around 70% carbon free in 2030. And for 50% of heating systems installed in buildings to be heat pumps by 2030. These are among the most important emissions drivers to revisit and revise among seeking other options that must be explored to further reduce emissions. MDE looks forward to working with the Climate Commission and other partners to find the right combination of policies and programs that will meet Maryland's climate goals while meeting the requirements that we create net economic and job benefits for our state. With that, are there any questions or comments that anyone has about any of the legislation that we touched on, or any information that you'd want to provide regarding legislation that we didn't have time to touch on today?
Yeah.
Well, Mark, this is Senator Pinsky. If I could make a couple of comments.
Yes, sir.
First of all, thanks for the overview. Very clear and insightful. Thank you. Before talking about some substance, let me thank two people who've been on this call. April Morton from Legislative Services and Ian Ullman, my staff, for actually drafting this with me. They are major contributors, and it couldn't have happened without them. But many of you on the call have been consulted and requested feedback and ideas and background. And I have to say that much of the legislation was informed by lessons from the Climate Commission, both good and bad. I think we've learned a lot of things over the last few years, and we've gone through draft plans and had votes. So a lot of that helped contribute to what was in the bill. One thing you could tell from Mark's overview is that it had some big picture items and some very detailed policies. It had the 60% reduction, the carbon neutral sort of umbrella broad goals, and then it had very specific actions. And we did that on purpose. We wanted to have a general guide path and give some examples of some policies we should follow. But to be very clear, those concrete specific policies will not get us to 60%. We're going to need some bold actions, because I think we've all acknowledged we've done a lot of the low-hanging fruit. And also, as we know, the market has been one of the factors in replacing coal with natural gas, which now that price is going up in the early years that we've pursued this effort. The other couple of quick items I wanted to mention is, look, buildings was a very center point of the discussions in Annapolis. We took to heart the recommendation of the buildings work group. One of the two was followed in terms of existing buildings. I think we've become the third state in the country to require reductions in existing buildings. But the other one of future construction, and whether it had to be all electrified or not, was debated hotly for a long period of time and was very controversial. And it put, I know, some people in a very difficult situation, given what the Climate Commission voted on last fall, I guess it was. That issue won't go away. There is a study group to look at, do we have the capacity? And, you know, I think the Climate Commission building group said it very clearly, did their homework. E3 confirmed it in terms of cost and capacity. And I think when that group comes back in 12 or 15 months, I think they're going to say, we were right the first time. And hopefully that'll allow us to proceed in that area. The final two elements I want to very quickly mention, and that is we had a fairly significant school element. And all the way along as lead sponsor, and I think the House members, Delegate Stein agreed, the state needs to lead by example. And we had elements where new school construction would also consider having as clean buildings as possible, whether a carbon net neutral or whatever. That didn't quite make it to the finish line in the earlier versions. There is a bump with support from the school construction. That issue will be revisited next year, I can tell you that. We have to use everything at our disposal to lead this fight, because it's not going to be an easy one. And the final point I'd like to make is, other than replacing vehicles in the state fleet and school buses, the whole issue of transportation is generally not included in the law. And we know it's very controversial. There's been talk of carbon taxes. There's been lots of legislation. But we also know transportation is the leading, or either first or second, depending on the year, leading contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So we constantly said we're not going to hit that head on. We had enough issues, as Mark explained. Some said too many issues, and we were criticized for that. But we decided, I think, consciously to say we're not going to take on transportation as it needs to be taken on. So I believe, and I think Delegate Stein will agree, that in the future, whether it's next year or the year after, the issue of transportation writ large, gas costs, mass transportation, you name it, that will come back, because it's got to be addressed. We think heating buildings and creating hot water in building sector and transportation sector are the two main areas we have to work on. And 60% will not be an easy lift. We know that. Secretary Grumbles has said that consistently when we argued at 40% and 50%. And the proof will be what we can do in the next plan. So I want to personally thank people. The bill is not as strong as I may have liked, but it puts us in the frontier, in the top 2, 3, or 4 states in the country. And I think many states will use part of this as a model. And I think this commission should take pride in that our work has helped shape what's in that bill. So, and again, I want to thank everyone on the call and MDE, while we disagreed at times, and obviously the House, Delegate Stein and Delegate Barbe as well, for their major contribution in shaping this bill. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate that. Delegate Stein, do you have a rebuttal?
No, nothing really to add, except that I wholeheartedly agree with Chairman Pinsky about the need to focus more on transportation in future years.
I know Earl Lewis is smiling. He's we all know that much more action is needed, and also coordination with some transformative actions and policies and investments at the federal level are going to be really important to see how those can help translate into action for us in the state of Maryland. But thank you for those comments, insights, Senator and Delegate. I would just like to say one thing about the 4 new work groups for the commission, and the importance of a more robust report of the commission and specifying environmental justice investments. We, as you noted, Mark, we have currently have 4 working groups. We also have, through the leadership of Charmaine Brown as a climate justice co-chair, a climate justice work group, although we don't necessarily call it that. And with the new work group that's focused on just transition and jobs training, and then the 3 work groups that focus on aspects of energy justice and progress. We as a commission will, through our steering committee, we'll want to coordinate how best to maximize commission member engagement and public sector engagement, because all of those work groups, the new ones, are very important. So figuring out how to integrate these working groups into our overall work plan is going to be a really important one to be focusing on the rest of this month and next month to get up and running with the working groups composition and how they fit in the most effective and efficient way. And I wanted to acknowledge that these are important areas that are worthy of working groups, and it's mundane a bit because it's about organization of the commission, but that'll be important follow-up to this meeting. And I don't expect us to make decisions on that today, exactly how we do that, but that'll be one where the staff for the commission will be reaching out to you for your input on composition and organization of the various working groups, and making sure that the environmental justice, the climate justice efforts that Charmaine is helping to lead continue to cut across all of the working groups. Anyway, thanks. Other folks, and Mark, thanks for the overview, and hope you get a drink of water because you covered a lot of ground.
So I talk too much. Noted. Okay. Any other
for me? So
any other questions or comments about the legislation or the road ahead? Lots of work ahead.
Yeah, this is Earl. I mean, obviously, transportation is fully engaged, and we've done a lot of work. We have a lot more work to do, and obviously, collaboration and partnership with the commission, being active in the subcommittees. Obviously we're committed to continue to do that so that we do everything we can to help us meet our aggressive but necessary transportation goals in terms of the environment. And I would just like to add that I'm really happy to see that solar photovoltaic sub-team, because MDOT actually has a procurement out in the street right now. They were hoping to get responses back for building several photovoltaic systems at MTA facilities, and we're working on a similar proposal tied to our solar agreement that we got going a couple of years ago at SHA facilities after that. So, we're looking to play our role more than just vehicles, but also being able to use MDOT facilities and properties to build additional photovoltaic resources for alternative energy in Maryland, clean energy.
Thanks, Earl. David Smedek, I see a hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I apologize for not being on video. I'm a little under the weather. So I hopefully come out coherent today. But I want to echo just the sincere appreciation for everybody that worked on all the legislation this year, the legislators, staff, advocates, all the stakeholders. It was a big year. So thank you to everybody. I think one question that I have for the road moving forward and the role of the commission's previous work to inform the future road ahead. I noted that, and I'm excited about the different working groups that are going to be under the umbrella of the commission, but there were a number of other studies and task forces about the Climate Solutions Now Act that, as Pinsky noted, some of the questions were evaluated and some answers provided by our over the last year or two. And so I'm just hoping that we will have pathways forward, that the commission will be providing our annual reports and the recommendations and all of the work that we did, the analyses from E3, et cetera, to say the Building Codes Administration, to the Public Service Commission, to all of the other pieces that are outside the commission's umbrella that are going to continue to evaluate this. So I guess it's both a comment and a question of, do we have the capability and insurance that that work that we've done over the last 2 years and the annual reports will be delivered and engaged with by those additional task forces that are outside the umbrella of the commission. So that's my, I guess, remark and question. Mark, I'll kick it back to you and just share appreciation again with everybody. You might have more comments later. Thanks.
I think it's a good question, David, and it highlights that we have MD has a lot of digesting still to do of the legislation and how we need to adjust our work plans to manage the many requirements within it and how all these things map together. And the work of the new working groups and the existing working groups and the commission's previous reports, and how that can kind of cross-pollinate with some of the other processes like the Building Energy Transition Implementation Task Force. All very much on my mind, but I don't have a coherent answer for you right now about what exactly that looks like, only to say that it's on our radar.
Thanks, Mark. I didn't expect some grandiose immediate response to that, but I appreciate that it's on your mind. Thank you.
Colby?
Thanks, Mark. I just want to say that, we really appreciate the adding in of the money for the Healthy Soils programs, because, I sit on the Healthy Soils committee or commission at Maryland Department of Agriculture. And one thing that we've seen so far is that really the lifts that we've done for carbon sequestration have been directly tied to water quality improvement, because that's the only funding we've had. And so if it didn't have a direct tie to water quality improvements and the best management practices, it just didn't get done. It wasn't prioritized. And so to me, this is something that has been needed for several years, and something I've asked that we champion and we promote because there's several things that we can put in place that don't directly tie to a water quality buffer or things like that when we get into planting trees and silviculture and the things that can be added in that are directly carbon sequestration but aren't directly fixing a buffer or a stream bed or something like that. So I think that's a huge piece that we really see as an opportunity to move agriculture farther down the line to be a better sink, carbon sink, and utilize the nature of combination between forestry and agriculture and how those two work together hand in hand. So I think that's a great opportunity. I think utilizing biofuels is another component that agriculture can be a part of in that transition from gas powered to electric power, and how the opportunities are there. And then finally, I think there's some opportunities within anaerobic digestion and ways to capture methane and remove that from the atmosphere and utilize it for renewable fuels as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunities agriculture is going to come to the table with to meet some of those more difficult pieces that really won't, I always say you can't turn the spigot completely off. We're always going to have pollution, but we have to have ways to mitigate that pollution as much as possible. So agriculture is here to play our part, and we do appreciate Chairman Pinsky for his ability to put those dollars in there and see the opportunity that agriculture can play.
Thanks, Colby. Any other questions or comments before we shift to working group and CJ team reports? Seeing none, Dr. Goodwin, would you please report out on the scientific and technical working groups activities for this year?
Yeah, well, thanks, Mark, and good afternoon, everyone. And it's just an inspiring meeting to have heard that summary, Mark. So thanks for that concise overview. So just very briefly, the STWG this year, we're going to be continuing our support of the state's efforts around saltwater intrusion and ocean acidification. That's ongoing. Also, since we last got together as a group, STWG, that's been working in collaboration with ARWG and the Coastmark Council, has concluded the 3 activities around blue carbon. So for those of you not familiar with blue carbon, this is the intertidal wetlands and submerged aquatic vegetation. And I'd like to call out both Dr. Lamb and Dr. Mercuria, 2 of the Maryland Sea Grant Fellows that have been working with the Commission and MDE during this past year, helping to coordinate. And they are preparing a summary report of the 3 areas that the Commission asked the blue carbon folks to focus on. And just as a reminder, the first looked at the methodology of calculating the amount of carbon that can be sequestered in wetland restoration, and what kind of formula or calculation could MDE use in the state inventory. The second one, at the request of Assistant Secretary Dr. Dorsey, was to look at innovations in financing. How can we expand these nature-based solutions, the blue carbon efforts, to scale? And the third one of those workshops, you really looked at the status and the long history that Maryland has had around nature-based solutions and the implications to both adaptation and sequestration. So all of those workshops were recorded. They're available online. And as I said, there will be a summary report out shortly. But most of our attention through the rest of the year is looking at 2 things. We have been looking at bringing in guest speakers once a quarter to talk about issues and what other regions, both in the US and across the world, are doing on some of these really tough issues. So we've been working with Mark to identify a couple of speakers. So please look out for those upcoming events. And most of our attention between now and September certainly is going to be focused on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC's 6th assessment report. And the first one of the working group reports had come out immediately prior to our last meeting. The way this is structured, there's 3 working groups that really do a deep dive to give you an understanding of the scale of these efforts. The purpose is not to do new science. These groups come together, they synthesize available information, current studies, reports, and the peer-reviewed literature. And there's about 300 scientists active in each of these working groups. So since we last met, the working group 2, which was the impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability, was released in February of this year. And just a couple of weeks ago, working group 3, the mitigation of climate change report, was released. These 3 reports, each of them are about 3,000 pages of information, will be synthesized with the final report, the synthesis report, expected in September of this year. So we're hoping that that report will be out in time to inform the science section of the Commission's annual report. We've, just to give a very brief synopsis, and we've been putting together with Mark just a very brief summary of where you can access these reports for those that want an overview. And in this simple one-pager, we're just highlighting some of the main conclusions out of these reports of relevance to Maryland. And just to highlight a couple of those issues, the first working group came out with the statement that it's unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. And so for the first time since this group's been reporting, in the past it's always been breaking down the percentage of certainty, highly certain. This is the first time that now they're saying certain things are unequivocal. And so I think that's very important. A couple of other things, the working group 2 highlighted that things are worse than we had projected in AR5 about 5 or 6 years ago. More than 40% of the world's population is now highly vulnerable. They also highlighted where the greatest opportunities are in terms of adapting to climate change. And the most recent report that came out, just to highlight a few of those, looking at the most recent analysis, and it could be that Dr. Dickerson, who's our expert on STWG on this, might want to add to that. But in order to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we need to limit carbon emissions to about 400 gigatons of CO2. If we continue emitting carbon dioxide at 2020 levels, this is only 10 years. So when you see the urgency of the actions that we take and we need to take, it's linked to these projections. And a couple of other things in that report, we need to be looking at ways of removing carbon from the atmosphere. There's a very large focus on innovation and technology, particularly technology transfer to do things at scale. And there's also a section there on policies and governance that could have some relevance to the thinking in the update of the GGRA plan. So with that, I expect to see that. Perhaps, Mark, I think your thought was that that could go out with the minutes from this meeting. And that's what STWG is up to. And I don't know, we've got both Dr. Kirschling and Dr. Dickerson. I don't know if you had anything to add to that brief summary.
Thank you, Peter. I think that was a very nice overview. Anything I could add would be at a high level of granularity. I'm glad to see that we are addressing carbon dioxide and methane. At some time in the future, I hope to see nitrous oxide and black carbon as part of Maryland's goals.
Thanks.
And nothing particular to add other than we do know the health effects of all of this.
Thank you, Dr. Goodwin, for that report. And yes, thank you also for providing a summary, which we can circulate with the commission members following the meeting today. Mike Powell, would you like to offer a report from the mitigation working group?
Sure. This group was the meeting we had was really a kickoff for the work we're going to be doing this year. So much like this group, we first started by reviewing all of the litigation which had passed. And there's no need to repeat all of that. Briefly touched on the fact we've got a couple studies going on, the manufacturing study that we're required by the statute to review and report to the legislature on, and the biomass to energy subgroup. We had considerable discussion about our need for coordination. With the new work groups being created, there's a lot of overlap, or at least actions that could come into conflict. And so we are going to try to encourage some overlap of membership, thinking that that's one way to prevent us from having a situation where one group says you can't do X and another group says you must do X. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time trying to do that. And a second area of coordination, as Earl Wells knows, is the transportation sector. Just as last year, the mitigation working group made the focus buildings, this year we plan to make the focus on transportation. And Senator Pinsky's comments pretty much echo some of the things that we discussed. Buildings are about 18% of Maryland's greenhouse gas emissions. Transportation is 40%. So obviously, for the goal that the legislature has set for us of a 60% reduction, we have to, in the plan that we produce, include significant reductions in transportation, something that Earl's group is already working on, but we have to somehow include it in the plan. We talked a little bit about what the challenges are there. To share with this group some of that, as of last year, there were about 33,000 zero-emission vehicles in Maryland. The goal is to reach 300,000 by 2025. So you're talking about a tenfold increase in zero-emission vehicles. It's important to recognize that this is not something that changes around quickly. Currently, the average new vehicle remains on the road for 12 years, not owned by the first owner by 12 years, obviously, but a vehicle bought today can be expected to be on the road to 12 years, and that's an average. So you got to figure that half the vehicles will be on longer. So obviously, vehicles being sold today, almost, or a very large percentage of them, will still be on the road in 2025 when we're trying to get to 300,000. And though there was work on the Clean Cars Act and other transportation issues this year, which are laudable, I don't think anyone thinks that there's going to be enough to reach the 300,000 number, much less the kind of reductions that we will need to get to 60%. So a lot of our work in the initial meeting was to talk about that challenge and begin to look at issues such as charging versus car incentives, looking at how we would recommend incentives, and beginning the process of looking at what other states are doing as a measure to see how we compare. So that is likely to be our focus this year. And obviously, we're going to be seeking opinions from everyone about what we should and shouldn't do, while trying to coordinate with all the groups at Department of Transportation and with the new work groups being established. I think that's it in a nutshell. Mark, if I left anything out, feel free to add it.
I'll add just one quick note that the MDE staff provided an update to the MWG regarding our preliminary findings for Maryland's 2020 greenhouse gas inventory. The numbers are not final. We are preparing to give a report to the Climate Commission possibly this June, which is when the commission has its next meeting with final numbers, if they're ready by then. If not then the following meeting. But we did share with the MWG that the preliminary numbers suggest that in 2020, Maryland's emissions were around 32% below 2006 levels. However, once we account for COVID impacts, as I think everyone understands, transportation emissions in 2020 were significantly lower than likely they would have been without shutdowns related to COVID. So backing out the COVID impacts, the reduction would probably be in the ballpark of a 28% reduction from 2006 levels. Both of those numbers are well ahead of Maryland's target for that year. 2020 is a target year. The requirement was that Maryland's emissions be at least 25% below 2006 levels by 2020. So we have confidence, and what we shared with the MWG is that we have confidence even with preliminary data that Maryland exceeded its 2020 target in the GGRA. Again, we'll have final inventory numbers to share with the Commission sometime this summer.
Thank you, Mark. If anybody has any questions, both about the meeting and about our plans, I'm happy to entertain it now, or if you want to send me or Kim Coble, who couldn't make today's meeting, after this, your questions, would be happy to try to respond.
Hey, Mike, this is Earl. In addition to what both Mike and Mark said, what's going to really help us, in addition to the state incentives that the legislature has made available, is that the federal government's IIJA plan has made available additional resources that will definitely be helpful to us moving more aggressively. Obviously, we're working on the statewide NEVI grant process that's focused on the alternative fuel corridors that we have designated across the state. But the other parts above and beyond the formula funding is discretionary funding. When that grant guidance comes out in November, we're going to want to be aggressive to get some of that competitive money to move projects forward. I know that the Delegate Stein recently reached out to MDOT related to the carbon reduction program. That's some additional funding that we're going to be able to use moving forward. And that's about $95 million, almost $95 million have been allocated to Maryland over the next 5 years, which is also formula funding. So we're going to definitely get it. And that includes $18 million next year. Federal Highway has certain priorities to using that funding, but obviously it's all focused on doing things that's going to help you reduce your state's carbon emissions. And some of those are not like directly related to vehicles. Some of it involves complete streets and other initiatives related to special bus lanes and bike lanes, traffic signaling, ITS type initiatives. So that's going to be helpful. I think if Delegate Stein's still on the line, I know Pilar will be getting back to you with some more details on that, but we appreciate you reaching out to us on that issue.
Yeah, I would just add, Earl, thank you for adding that. When the governor's executive order that established an infrastructure subcabinet, really a bipartisan infrastructure law subcabinet to immediately start coordinating among the state agencies on how the hundreds of millions of dollars coming through the federal IIJA law, the bipartisan infrastructure law, might be properly coordinated and invested for Marylanders. That's certainly a big component of it. The clean transportation funding that's coming through the bipartisan infrastructure law. So that's one of the items. I know Beth has an interest in how is the state going to be coordinating those really important federal dollars to advance our climate ambition. That's one where I think the Climate Change Commission and others can provide thoughts on how to help that. But on a regular basis now, the state agencies are meeting to discuss, okay, how much are we getting on different agenda items, and certainly climate change, clean energy, clean transportation are part of that discussion.
And that's a good point. And one of the things we discussed is there's a lot of activity going on.
Yeah.
And obviously the mitigation working group is merely one piece of that. I think, and I think most of the mitigation working group agrees, a really we're almost a scorekeeper in part. There's a huge amount of activity going on. Is it enough to get us to the 60% overall plan? And if not, what other recommendations would we have? We're not trying to displace anything, but at the end of the day, the General Assembly placed on our shoulders the accounting for what it gets. Does it get to us to the goal that's been set? And it's a way uphill climb. Huge amount of activity. Don't get me wrong. You can't turn on the TV during a sports game without an ad for an electric vehicle. But the question is it enough? And that's one of the things we're going to be looking at.
I see hands from Beth Harbor and then David Smetic. Beth, go ahead. Beth, you're muted.
Did the wrong button. Thank you, Deputy Secretary Lewis and Secretary Grumbles and Mike Powell for raising up this issue. I had kind of posed a question to the MCCC leadership around, is there a role for us? I'm new to the commission, very pleased to be part of it, and whether there's a role for us to be looking at, as you said, Mike, sort of watchdogging and scorecarding this federal money that's coming in for climate action. So, it's just a huge opportunity, and thrilled to hear that, as I would expect, that DOT is on it, and love to hear from the other agencies, what their climate, ambitions are, and how to work across agencies to maximize the federal funding coming into the state, and also make sure that we don't miss out on those competitive opportunities. So I don't know what role the commission has, or whether it falls in a specific work group, or whether we could have more discussion around it, but love to hear your thoughts.
I can give you mine, which is nobody, at least in the mitigation work groups, think we're going to displace the Department of Transportation and the other agencies as they very, very aggressively pursue every single federal dollar they can get their hands on. I do think we have a role in providing feedback. And of course, one of the things that the mitigation working group and the commission do is seek feedback from the public about how we're doing. But Earl and Ben, I don't know if you want to add something to that.
I think as Ben and others knows, that MDOT is committed to working collaboratively with the Maryland Department of the Environment, the Maryland Energy Administration, and continually to keep the Maryland Commission on Climate Change in the loop on everything that we're doing. We are actively involved in all of the subcommittees, and we'll be involved in the new subcommittees to the extent that we're allowed to be, and I'm sure we will be, and are fully engaged in the state's goals and committed to doing what we can to help us meet them. That's not to say that it's all going to be easy, but if it was easy, it would already be done. So challenges would be overcome. That's
and recognize
how we have to look at it.
It's easier for the commission to make, and the mitigation work group and the commission to make recommendations for state legislative action or state executive action than it is to on the federal level. It doesn't mean we can't make suggestions, but obviously I think as the last session and as Senator Pinsky described, the commission can have a much greater impact in making recommendations for legislation.
Yeah, and I think another important factor that comes to play in Maryland, we've already been recognized as a state as being #1 at reducing emissions while still growing the economy, and that's the continual challenge. So we've shown over the last couple of decades that we know how to do that, and I'm sure we're going to demonstrate that we can continue to do that as we move forward over the next several decades and beyond.
David Smetic, you want to get in on this too?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And apologies for any background noise on a work at a neighbor's house. But I wanted to follow up on Beth's note and Michael and Earl's discussion points of, I know that we as a commission are required by law to issue our annual reports with recommendations to the governor and the legislature on actions to take. But that report only comes out at the end of the year, and the infrastructure dollars are being distributed essentially now. And so I'm very excited to hear that there is a central kind of coordinating point in the Maryland state government for a lot of that work, so that there is some better communication, because I know it can be very hectic. So thank you for that update, Secretary Grumples. It's great. But I do wonder, we can play watchdog as a commission, but how are we also at least acknowledging that we are paying attention to it, that we want to offer our support and expertise as the Commission on Climate Change for ensuring that the infrastructure dollars from the federal government and any additional money coming from the federal government is maximized to achieve our climate and economic goals. So I do think that maybe it's a discussion that we can have in the June meeting or offline if we need to amongst individual commissioners, but how are we providing that information and acknowledgement to the folks that are doing the really difficult work of managing this significant increase in funding? It's a hard job, but it's also very exciting. And I just want to make sure that as the Climate Commission, we are taking the opportunity to think through how can we make it clear that this is a once in a generation opportunity from the infrastructure side of things to be ensuring that the investments the state is making with the federal dollars are going to climate solutions and local economic and public health solutions as well. So
Yeah.
I know the state agencies are, not ignoring that, but I would love to hear about how the commission might be able to really lift up our voice in that process.
Yeah. Thanks, David and Beth. And I'll just say that Mark and I are already communicating, Stuart, about follow-up coordination on that point with the governor's infrastructure subcabinet. Allison Mayer is chairing it, and we'll follow up with her. And our next meeting is in June, right, Mark? Or is there maybe
That's right, June.
We'll have some side discussions and follow up on that notion of role of a commission and providing input or weighing in on the federal investments in environmental climate related infrastructure.
And I would like to add, former Treasurer Nancy Kopp a couple of years ago put out a challenge to state agencies to put resources, to help us manage and track our initiatives related to climate change. About 10 months ago, MDOT, we were listening very carefully to former treasurer, and we stood up an office of climate change, resiliency, and adaptation, which is directed by Sandy Hertz. We've actually added staff to that office very recently, and part of the objective of that office is to help us keep score on what has been the impact of all the things that we're doing and we're going to do moving forward. And I think that's important. I know DGS has done that also. So we listen, and we're aligned in working with our state agencies, the legislature, and the many private sector advocates and NGOs who are part of our group in working to get things done.
And Sandy has been an excellent partner. So thank you for creating that office and making her director.
Yeah, and I'll just add, David, that Earl and Sandy have been very good about briefing us on the mitigation working group about the efforts they're pursuing on spending the infrastructure funds, but recognize that it often comes with very tight restrictions. I know during the last meeting we talked about the fact that there are the restrictions on where they can spend money on charging stations are frustrating to me because I think they should be a different place than where the feds think they should be. But I mean, they're literally 1 mile limits from these corridors. So but there's a very open channel back and forth between Department of Transportation, the mitigation work group, about what's going on, and we provide advice back, but frankly, the federal money comes with a lot of strings.
It does, yeah. Thanks, Michael. And I'm happy to have more of these conversations offline as well. But I am curious about where there is flexibility in some of the funds a little bit more, like the state energy program dollars or others where we can really make sure they're invested in a really smart way. As not saying they haven't been, there's lots of good programs we're doing, but where we can really nail it, I think would be really fun. So I'll step back, but thank you all. I really appreciate that.
We should continue on with, we've got 2 more working groups and the CJ team to offer reports. And then we need to save the last 10 minutes for public comment. So Secretary Hadaway-Riccio, would you please provide an overview of issues related to the Adaptation and Resilience Working Group?
Sure. Well, let me just make some brief high-level remarks, and then I'll turn it over to Christine Kahn to fill in some detail. But I will start just by building on the conversation that has been happening already about the federal infrastructure money, and note that we did take under advisement that the ARWG members, as well as members of the steering committee, recommended that we not only keep our eye on potential funding opportunities, but also make sure that we're building capacity to compete for those dollars. So I don't want to get ahead of our working group, but I'm almost certain that you will see something to that effect in our work plan for 2022, and that's an item we'll be discussing at our upcoming meeting. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that in addition to the impactful legislation that was covered today, there were also some really beneficial and impactful budget decisions during the legislative session that directly tie to adaptation and resiliency. So full funding for program open space, full funding for the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund, and nearly $2 million in funding for our resiliency through restoration program. That would not have happened without the governor's leadership and the concurrence of the General Assembly. So thanks to all of you for your support, because again, those are directly contributing to our success in Maryland on adaptation, resiliency, stormwater, flooding impacts, and much more. And that is a great segue to Christine, if you want to take it from here.
Thank you. So I would like to just cover a couple of highlights regarding what the state agencies have been up to during the month of April, which folks may know is Maryland Flood Awareness Month. And this was declared by the governor, I believe it was last year. So the Maryland Resiliency Partnership has kind of embraced this and has been doing a number of different activities throughout the month. And I'll pull out a couple of highlights, particularly some things that DNR has been involved in. But the idea behind Maryland Flood Awareness Month is to push information out to citizens to help them know their risk, to make a plan, and then act on that plan. Not only citizens, but local governments, state agencies, and so forth. So there were a couple fun and interesting things that we did this year, or this month. One was on Earth Day, and DNR staff and MDE, including Secretary Crumbles, went to Havre de Grace to celebrate Earth Day and do a ribbon cutting and planting event on Water Street. And the ribbon cutting was for to commemorate some of the living shoreline restoration work that has occurred out in Havre de Grace. And they're really working to develop these practices on a large scale to provide the city with long-term coastal resiliency benefits. And we're also supporting them with enhancing waterfront access and really making it a thriving economic area. There's been a number of social media messages that we've been pushing out through the Maryland Resiliency Partnership and through certainly DNR's social media website. So we're looking at getting more information out to communities about the My Coast tool. which is a tool that citizens can use to document flooding, rain events, and storm damage in their communities. We pushed out the Breaking Ground event at our very first Resiliency Through Restoration project at the West River United Methodist Center, and it was a living shoreline project that addressed high tides and enhancing habitat, protecting infrastructure from coastal impacts. And then keep your eyes out for a fun flood awareness trivia event that the Maryland Department of Transportation hosted. And it included contestants from DNR, including me, MDE, MDP, and the Maryland Environmental Service. It should be released in a day or two, and it's a really fun way to brush up on some fun flooding facts, and I'm sure you'll get a laugh or two. So in terms of what the, some progress on the Adaptation, Resiliency, and Working Group work plan, one of our work group efforts is to advance the saltwater intrusion plan recommendations that have asked for a creation of a state agency working group. And that's been led by the Department of Planning, and it's staffed by DNR, MDE, MDA, and the Critical Area Commission. And the idea here is that we are working together to develop an inventory of state programs. We're kind of starting off at the inventory stage to look at strategies and solutions that help support and align these opportunities for wetland migration and to help inform a statewide wetland adaptation plan. So that group has met a couple of times, and they're making some progress. Chris also mentioned during the legislative update the Chief Resilience Officer and the Office of Resiliency creation at the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. So this is certainly an area that the working group is going to start looking at, and we want to start queuing up that coordination with the office to look at how we can update the state adaptation and resiliency strategy that's required in the legislation. And we want to be able to identify and start getting to work to really start teasing out how we'll accomplish this coordination both across the commission, with the Coast Smart Council, and this new office. So we're eager to get started on that. So that'll be some upcoming work with our work group. We are also having our next meeting on May 11th. From 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. And the focus of this quarter's meeting is on extreme heat, climate, health, and equity. And we'll be using this as a way to lead a discussion to identify some specific actions to address the intersection of those topics. So that is what I have for an update. I'm happy to take any questions if folks have anything they'd like to ask.
Thanks, Kristen. Any questions for the ARWG? All right, well, seeing none, thank you for that report. And we have one more working group and then the CJ team. Amy, would you inform the commission on ECO's recent and upcoming activities?
Will do. I'm Amy Lambert. I'm a new co-chair for the ECO working group. We had our quarterly meeting last week. We had a wonderful presentation from Meg Anderson, who is Vice President of Learning and Engagement at the National Aquarium. She presented about a 45-minute session on communicating about climate change, and it was really informative. It's actually a much longer program that she shortened for us, but it really dug into very specific dialogue techniques and word choice and how to direct conversations to where they need to go. So it was really, really well done. I want to thank Laura Banke from the aquarium for suggesting the topic and for connecting us with Meg. She was a wonderful resource. Ongoing initiatives that the Eco Working Group has, these are in accordance with our work plan. We are kind of revisiting logos for the commission. We're still in the very early process of that. We're going to be developing a short video or short video series, depending on how much we want to put in there for the commission. And we're organizing a webinar on the Climate Solutions Now Act. But this will be for the public. And specifically, I want to thank Kim Coble and Mike Powell, who volunteered as speakers. So we have a meeting next week. We'll be coordinating the logistics of that, working through the agenda and how we would market that out. And that's the Eco Working Group. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Amy. Any questions for Amy or the Eco Group?
I know we're on time constraints, but Amy, I don't know everybody. I don't think everybody's met you. So just say a little more about yourself and this important new role you're in your organization.
Sure. So I'm Director of Communications at EA Engineering, Science, and Technology. We're an environmental consultancy headquartered in Hunt Valley. I'm sure you are all familiar with John Coombe, is my coworker and recommended me for this. It's been a personal passion. I've been in the consulting communications business for about 30 years and working with the DOT and other agencies. So I'm really excited to be a part of this working group.
Thanks for your help.
Thank you. Charmaine, can you provide an update on the work of the climate justice team?
Yes, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Secretary Grumbles, Delegate Stein, Senator Pinsky, if you're still on. And it's just really nice to be able to serve Marylanders in this capacity. I have to tell you the commitment that you've all demonstrated in terms of the leadership to all Marylanders, no matter where you live or how much money you make, that we're committed to making sure that we're in vibrant and healthy communities where we live, work, and play. And so the CJ team has been very busy. We meet monthly, and we have been coordinating with the existing 4 work groups and look forward to coordinating with the new work groups in a way that ensures that we are additive and not duplicative. And so the first thing that we did, we created, as you all know, our vision and mission statement last year. And this year we were really focused on refining our process, strengthening our touch and leverage points with the different working groups to ensure that we have very tangible and specific outcomes that can demonstrate the impact of the group. And so we have been getting the work group plans for the year. We're looking at those plans collectively and identifying where we can incorporate an equity lens with an eye towards what we have decided are the core climate issues that overburdened communities face and how we can collectively identify solutions for those issues. And so it would be no surprise to this group that leading the core climate justice issues, number 1 would be heat, then water, and obviously extreme weather concerns. And so we're definitely looking forward to getting the plans that we do not yet have, and then incorporating, as I said, the CJ lens into those plans. We've also been doing a lot of listening. We recognize that we have a lot of smart people at the table, but there's still a lot to learn. And so we've spent time with Dr. Amur Sapkota at the University of Maryland. We've spent some time with Bernice Miller-Travis, just asking some questions and getting some perspective. And we also plan to have a speaker series and bring, we meet monthly, but we do plan to bring different experts to our meetings on a regular basis as they are available so that we can continue to dialogue with experts. We also onboarded 2 new experts to the CJ team Alan Anderson from Bowie State University, who's a professor there, and Ava Richardson, who is in the Baltimore Office of Sustainability. And with onboarding Alan and Ava, we increased our representation of diversity on the CJ team. And so we will be meeting on Friday, and we are going to be exploring some educational opportunities for the MCCC. I don't have a lot of the details that I can share today, but suffice it to say that the idea behind some of the education that we are exploring is to support those who are doing the work and to make sure that we understand some of the potential obstacles can interfere with our effectiveness. And so when the time is right and when we're a little further down the road, I look forward to sharing more specifics with you about that. But that, Mark, kind of wraps up the update for today, and I'd be happy to take questions if time permits. Thank you.
Thanks, Charmaine. And we do have a minute or two before shifting to public comments. So any questions for Charmaine or any other business to be brought before the commission? Hearing, oh, yes, Dr. Goodwin.
Yeah, just a quick comment, Mark, because I think it's fairly new. I'd just like to thank Charmaine for her summary there, and perhaps Secretary Grumbles or you just want to emphasize that these issues of climate justice, the idea is to have it deeply embedded across all the working groups with representatives from each working group contributing and being aware and making sure Charmaine's groups, your expertise gets embedded through all of our activities.
Yeah, it's a priority. Thank you for that, Peter. And as Rebecca Rare knows, because she was participating heavily in the Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities Commission meeting earlier this week, MDE has, we've been working on it for the last couple of years, and hopefully next month we'll be able to put it out on our website, an environmental justice screening tool that has many layers of really important information that builds upon EPA and the University of Maryland, and is very consistent with the spirit and language of the Climate Solutions Now Act in terms of identifying areas for disadvantaged and underserved and those at risk of vulnerable to climate risk. So that's going to be a really important tool for planning and policy making, and a bridge between the Climate Change Commission and the Environmental Justice Commission. So thank you. And thanks, Charmaine, for walking on that bridge between the two commissions.
My pleasure.
We have just a few seconds before needing to go to public comment, but I do see hands and want to recognize Russ and Earl.
Great. Just a quick comment that in terms of morbidity and mortality as a consequence of rising temperatures, declining air quality is on the top of the list. And MDE and the University of Maryland have a proposal into EPA to get some resources to address the environmental justice issues surrounding air quality. Details available offline.
Thanks, Russ.
And I just wanted to add that our zero emission vehicle infrastructure plan that we're putting together tied to ZVIP has a second webinar tomorrow from 1 to 2:30. And the topic of that webinar is to get input related to our equity and environmental justice related aspects of that statewide plan. So obviously anyone is welcome to join us. The more, the better, the input that we get. And I'm looking forward to that tomorrow afternoon from 1 to 2:30. Which includes discussion of the screening tool, because there are options there, and we want to make sure we get good consensus on which one we use. as part of our strategy development process.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for that. And we are moving into public comment. I see that Natasha Sims and Jeff Silva have offered to make public comments. Are there any other members of the public who would like to make public comment? You can indicate your interest by putting either your name in the chat, raising your hand right now, or unmuting. If you're on the phone, you can hit *6 and say your name. All right, hearing no others. Vantasha, if you're still with us, please take it away.
Yes, hello everyone, I'm here. Well, my name is Vantasha Sims. I'm a born and bred Marylander. I currently reside here in Charles County, Maryland. Let me first of all say what a pleasure it has been to just be associated with this committee. You guys have done a great job. When Secretary Grumbles talk about the changes that this committee or this commission has made across the board, I would like to say, as someone is observing this commission, that I've seen changes that you guys have made, personal changes in your makeup, in your ideology, in your thinking, in your methods, to actually contribute and help all of Maryland. So I want to thank you guys for all the work you're doing. But when we talk about shutting down fossil fuel plants here in Maryland, I want to make sure that they're being shut down safely. I want to know what this commission is doing to make sure we're monitoring those plants, to make sure they're not leaking. What are we doing to make sure we're monitoring the pipelines that's running across Maryland? Are we checking them on a consistent basis? And where can we actually find that information? Also, I would like to talk about environmental justice and economic development. Some reason, somehow, someone had gotten their mind that environmental justice and economic development cannot coincide with one another. I would like to see this commission put out something that improves that smart growth is a real possibility here in the state of Maryland. There's real ways to go about doing that. I'm sure I don't have the time to go about it all. You guys are professionals. You guys are more experts than what I am at this. So I'm going to trust in you guys to really put that information out to anyone who's talking about economic development and want to just totally destroy our neighborhoods, destroy our waterways, destroy our communities. There are better ways that we can build here in Maryland. So I want to make sure we're building smart here in Maryland. I also would like to talk about the correlation between our environmental health and our mental health and our physical health as well, along with our fiscal health here across Maryland. All of those things work together for a healthy community, and it really helps sustain the community across the board. And lastly, I would like to talk about the Environmental Human Rights Campaign, something that we've been talking about. I just had a meeting with them yesterday. That's another important piece of legislation that's going to have to be addressed here in the state of Maryland within the next legislative session, maybe the next 2 years or so. There are more issues that we need to address here in the state of Maryland, bold legislation that we need to continue to address here in the state of Maryland. And I don't want to take too long, so I just want to thank you guys for all the work you continue to do. And please know I'm always here in Charles County to assist you in any way I can.
Thank you, Vantasha, and thank you for all the work that you do. Jeff Silva, are you with us? Hey, Jeff.
Hi, thank you very much. I've got the privilege to be able to address you, and I certainly am privileged with that. Thanks. My impressions of the 2022 passed legislation is that the relevance of the Climate Solutions Now Act is so significant that it could have been enacted 20 years ago, and it still would be benefiting all of us today and also beyond. Maryland also should be complimented for providing a legal definition for the phrase environmental justice. Now, the Democratic majority of the General Assembly went ahead without waiting for recommendations from the Governor's Commission on Climate Change. Instead of a 50% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2030, by law, it's now 60%, and by 2031. Instead of 80% reduction by 2050, it's now net zero by 2045. What's worse is the Climate Solutions Now Act has demanded from MDE/MCCC policy recommendations that are needed for Maryland to obtain those goals. When the MCCC could have sent sufficiently effective greenhouse reduction recommendations that would have been politically harsh and difficult, MCCC didn't. Had it done so, such as demanding third-party verified annual CO2 emissions report from contractors seeking to get Maryland state contracts, basically the General Assembly would have been more careful about making demands from the MCCC. Now MCCC's recommendation has to be able to get California size reductions of greenhouse gases with Maryland's insufficient native renewable energy sources. I have a comment about the use of EVs and increasing their presence on the road. I ask that MCCC recommend that auto dealers must have charging equipment installation electricians so that buyers of EVs get level 2 EV charging outlet installed in their property within 2 weeks after the purchase. This would basically, right now, those people that get an EV, they're the people on the bleeding edge. But for mass sale, it's going to have to be a much more streamlined process, particularly about getting a level 2 charging circuit. Moving along, now under the Climate Solution Now Act, it has a clause where it disqualifies highway widening or additional road construction as a greenhouse gas reduction measure. Now, won't that conflict with the Third Bay Bridge to the Eastern Shore, particularly if Ocean City loses its beach resort reputation due to sea level rise? Shouldn't the greenhouse gases from such a project be avoided to help the Eastern Shore maintain its status as a resort destination? Thank you very much for this opportunity. I applaud Maryland for being so progressive and brave in facing climate change as it has, and I wish us all the best of success. Thanks for your work. Bye.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, I think we are at the end of our meeting. It's nearly 3 o'clock. Thank you for those public comments. The commission is scheduled to have its second quarterly meeting on June 28th. The commission steering committee will meet prior to that meeting to set the agenda. Secretary Grumbles, the meeting is yours to adjourn.
Let's adjourn. And
Thank
thanks
you.
again, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Take
Thanks,
care.
Ben.
Thanks, Mark. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.